In 1941, 12 scientists locked themselves inside a building in Leningrad with enough food to survive a 900-day siege. Thousands of pounds of edible seed, rice, wheat, corn, potatoes, sorted and cataloged on wooden shelves, surrounded by a city that was starving to death. Over the next 28 months, all 12 of them died of starvation at their desks. Not one of them ate a single seed. What they were protecting would go on to reshape American agriculture. Their story has been largely forgotten outside of academic circles. The collection belonged to a Soviet botanist named Nikolai Vavilov, who had spent 20 years traveling in 64 countries collecting seeds, not random plants, the ancestors, wild relatives and ancient land races containing genetic traits that the modern world had already begun to lose. Drought-resistant wheat from Ethiopia, flood-tolerant rice from Southeast Asia, cold-hardy potatoes from the Andes, and varieties collected directly from American farms and research stations. Strains of corn, wheat, and tobacco that were already disappearing from U.S. fields as industrial agriculture replaced regional diversity with uniform hybrids. By 1940, the Vavilov Institute held over 250,000 seed samples, making it the largest collection of plant genetics on Earth. Some of those samples were the last surviving copies of varieties that had once been grown across the American Midwest, the Southern Plains, and the Appalachian Highlands. Vavilov's work rested on a principle that American agriculture would spend the next century confirming through repeated failure. Genetic diversity is the insurance policy for the food supply. When diversity disappears, a single disease can destroy an entire national crop in one season. By the summer of 1941, those 250,000 samples were housed in a building that was about to fall inside the German army's siege line around Leningrad. Vavilov himself was not there. A year earlier, Stalin's government had arrested him. His crime was practicing Mendelian genetics. Stalin had endorsed Trofim Lysenko, a pseudoscientist who rejected genetic science entirely and claimed that crops could be reshaped through environmental conditioning alone. The theories were scientifically worthless, but they were politically convenient. They promised agricultural breakthroughs through the slow, careful work of real plant breeding. Vavilov opposed Lysenko publicly and defended the science. He was charged with sabotage and sentenced to death. The sentence was later reduced to 20 years in a labor camp. Nikolai Vavilov, the man who had assembled the most important seed collection in human history, died of starvation in a Soviet prison in January 1943. He starved in a cell. His colleagues starved 400 miles away, guarding his life's work. What followed was one of the least known acts of sacrifice in the history of science. On September 8, 1941, the German army completed its encirclement of Leningrad. The siege lasted 900 days. The city was cut off entirely. No food, no fuel, no supplies. By winter, the daily bread ration had fallen to 125 grams per person, roughly one thin slice, mostly made from sawdust and cellulose. Civilians ate wallpaper paste, boiled leather, and stripped bark from trees. An estimated 800,000 people died of starvation during the siege. Inside the Vavilov Institute, the remaining staff faced a situation that no one in the city shared. They were surrounded by food. Thousands of pounds of edible grain, rice, potatoes, and corn sat on shelves within arm's reach. They could have eaten it. No one outside the building would have known. Instead, they organized a rotation, 2 people in every room at all times. The purpose was not to protect the seeds from the outsiders. It was to ensure that no one was ever alone with them long enough for hunger to override judgment. The first to die was found at his desk during the winter of 1941, holding a bag of rice large enough to have sustained him for months. Dmitry Ivanov was a rice specialist who had spent his career cataloging thousands of rice varieties from across Asia. He died surrounded by rice. Alexander Stuchkin, the groundnut specialist, died surrounded by peanuts, one of the most calorie-dense foods in existence. Lilia Rodina guarded the oat collection. She died. The oats survived. Over 28 months, 12 scientists died. Each had dedicated their professional life to a single crop. Each died within reach of that crop they had studied. I keep thinking about the calculation they must have made. A bag of rice feeds one person for a month. A bag of rice seed planted feeds a village for a century. They chose the century. The collection survived the siege intact. Every sample, every variety, every genetic line that Vavilov had spent 2 decades assembling. In the years that followed, the Vavilov collection became one of the most important genetic resources in global agriculture. Crop breeders from around the world, including American researchers, drew directly on material from those shelves to develop disease-resistant wheat, drought-tolerant rice, and cold-hardy grain varieties. Crops bred using Vavilov genetics ended up in fields across Kansas, Iowa, and the Dakotas. The seeds those scientists died protecting are in the lineage of crops growing on American soil today. The context makes what happened next difficult to reconcile. The genetic diversity that Vavilov collected and that 12 of his colleagues died to protect is precisely what the American agricultural system has spent the last half-century eliminating. 4 corporations now control over 60% of the global proprietary seed market. They sell patented monocultures, genetically uniform crops engineered for maximum yield and virtually nothing else. The consequences of that uniformity have already played out on American soil. In 1970, 85% of American corn shared a single genetic trait. A fungal mutation exploited it and destroyed 15% of the entire U.S. corn crop in a single season. That kind of event is exactly what Vavilov spent his life working to prevent. The USDA once operated a free seed distribution program that mailed diverse seed varieties to every farm in the country for 85 years. The seed industry lobbied Congress to shut it down in 1924. America once grew 17,000 apple varieties. Grocery stores now carry 5. Each of those losses represents a genetic line that cannot be recovered. The warnings were filed. The research was published. The pattern was documented across decades of American agricultural history, and the diversity that 12 scientists gave their lives to protect has been steadily replaced on American farmland by proprietary monocultures sold under licensing agreements. People literally starved to death to keep genetic diversity alive. The American agricultural system inherited that diversity and transferred it to 4 chemical companies, who converted it into intellectual property. Nikolai Vavilov died in a prison cell in 1943 for the crime of practicing science. 12 of his colleagues died in a building full of food because they believed the future of agriculture was more important than their own survival. The collection they preserved is still housed in St. Petersburg. The genetic material they protected still runs through American crop lines. But the world they died to preserve, one in which genetic diversity was maintained, seeds were exchanged freely, and no single corporation controlled the food supply, is being dismantled on American soil one patent at a time. The file was always there. The records were always public. Once again, nobody opened it. I think about those 12 people often. Not just what they gave up, but what they assumed would be done with what they saved. I do not think they pictured it being sold. If this one stays with you the way it stayed with me, send it to someone. There are more case files like this one buried in the records of American agriculture. Subscribe if you want to come along.